This section of the presentation will discuss how to prepare your IRB submission and provides a breakdown of the IRB review process. I will discuss the process step by step from the start of the application to the closure of the study in Mentis. It is important to give yourself a sufficient amount of time to prepare your protocol submission before any expected or anticipated deadlines. In the next few slides, I'll discuss some things that you should consider. This is our Submitting an IRB step-by-step guidance page. This is a great resource to utilize if you are new to the submission process or if you just want to double check that everything you have prepared is ready for review. Within each drop-down, we have included information about each step of the submission process. And at the very top of this page, we also post the number of protocols that are currently in our queue awaiting coordinator review. This is a great indicator for how busy our office is and gives you an idea of how early in advance you should plan to submit your study for the approval process. Student PIs at UTA are required to have a faculty advisor listed on their protocol. Once a submission is complete and ready for IRB review, the student PI will be required to submit the protocol to their faculty advisor in Mentis. It is the faculty advisor's responsibility to review the submission, ensure everything is accurate and complete, and then they will be responsible for submitting the protocol on the student's behalf for IRB coordinator review. If you are a student, it's important to communicate with your faculty advisor regularly throughout the submission process to ensure that your protocol is being reviewed and submitted for IRB review in a timely fashion. If edits or corrections are needed, it is possible that the faculty advisor may return it back to you to make these changes before we even receive it in our office. Communication is definitely key to ensure these things are moving smoothly throughout the review process. If you are a master's student submitting a research protocol, our office advises that you submit the protocol at least one semester before your planned graduation. If you're a doctoral student, we advise at least 9 months in advance. The reason behind this suggestion is because our office cannot guarantee the IRB review process will be completed in sufficient time if you do not plan ahead. In other words, improper planning would not be a justifiable reason for the IRB to review your study ahead of the other studies awaiting review in the queue. All protocols are reviewed in the order they are received. Just a reminder that you can check our Submitting an IRB Protocol webpage to find our queue tracker. While this doesn't necessarily give you a definite timeline to prepare for, it does give you an idea of how busy our office is. The higher the number, the longer you will need to wait in order to receive a preliminary review. At this time, it's fairly normal for our queue to be in the 30s. At the beginning and end of a semester, it should be expected that this number will be higher than normal. So keep this in mind while you are preparing for your submission. The second step in the submission process is ensuring that all personnel and collaborators on the project have completed their required training for the type of protocol you are submitting. It's also important to consider whether any previously completed training has expired and needs to be renewed. In the next few slides, I will discuss some of our training modules, when they will be required, and how long each module is valid for. HSP training must be renewed every 3 years. This is a requirement for all researchers, UTA personnel, and non-UTA collaborators. If your study has non-UTA collaborators engaged in the research, they will not be able to access our HSP training in Mentis. In order to access that website, they will need UTA login credentials. All non-UTA collaborators should provide a copy of their HSP training completion certificate that was completed at their institution or through another training platform like City Program. We have a multi-site and IRB Reliance webpage that can be accessed from our IRB homepage, and here you will find a list of equivalent modules as well as links to modules that we recommend for collaborators that are not affiliated with another institution. Again, regardless of their role in the study, any researcher engaged in human subject research must have active HSP training. Some studies may require personnel to complete additional training. For instance, if your study will utilize NSF funding, you may be required to complete the Responsible Conduct of Research training or RCR training. If your study has NIH funding or will utilize funding from any other PHS compliant agencies, you may be required to complete both conflict of interest training or COI training, as well as a COI disclosure. If your study has a clinical trial, or if it will utilize any FDA-regulated drugs or devices, then good clinical practice training or GCP training will be required for all personnel. Our office will inform you if any of these additional training requirements will apply, and if you would like to plan ahead, you can find this information listed on our website as well. We also have 2 different web pages specifically devoted to PI or Principal Investigator responsibilities and Faculty Advisor responsibilities. It is important to read through these responsibilities if you are planning to conduct research here at UTA. These responsibilities are expected of any researcher planning to serve as a PI for a research project, regardless if they are a faculty member, staff, or student. If a student will serve as the PI for a study, the faculty advisor listed on their study also has oversight responsibilities to ensure the research is being conducted ethically and in accordance with the approved protocol. Both of these pages can be accessed from our IRB homepage. The next step in the submission process is ensuring that all required forms have been completed and are ready for IRB review. This includes the protocol application, the consent form, and any supplemental documents that may be required for the type of protocol you are submitting. In the next few slides, I'll discuss the required forms for an IRB submission and where each of them can be located. The next step in the submission process is to ensure that your submission has a completed IRB application form and an informed consent document. Informed consent is required for all research studies. We have different types of consent documents and templates for each type posted on our forms webpage. Your submission should also include copies of any data collection instruments that you intend to use in your study. This includes copies or screenshots of any surveys, the script or list of questions that will be asked during interviews or focus groups, as well as any recruitment language or materials that you plan to use. If you intend to utilize non-public contact information, you will also be required to attach permission letters or communication granting you permission to utilize the non-public resource for research purposes. A few examples of this may include access to a listserv, private social media groups, or recruiting from other institution or private entities. We have 2 different protocol applications. The first application shown on the left is our primary research application, and this application should be used for any research study with humans that will involve either interaction with subjects or a form of intervention. The application on the right is our secondary research application, and this application should be used for any research study that will use private or identifiable data that have been collected or will be collected for non-research purposes. This would include use of information from a data bank or records, or utilizing biospecimens or excess blood from a lab. There are prompts at the beginning of each application that describe what type of research each application should be used for. But if you have any questions about what type of research project your study would fall under, please feel free to reach out to us. Please ensure that all questions in the application have a response, even if you are just notifying us that certain portions of the document do not apply. If an incomplete application is received by our office, we will return it back to the PI for edits, and upon resubmission, it will be entered into the bottom of the queue. If you have questions about some of the sections and how to provide a response, please feel free to reach out to us before you submit. The first section of our protocol application is where you will list all collaborators who will be interacting with subjects or who will have access to identifiable data that are not affiliated with UTA. Along with listing each collaborator in the first part of the application, the non-UTA collaborator will also be required to complete a non-UTA collaborator form that provides details about the institution they are affiliated with, their role in the study, and where data collection procedures will take place, and contains their contact information. Each collaborator will also be required to provide proof of HSP training completion. This can be provided from a module completed at their institution or from one of the provided training module options listed on our multi-site research and reliances page. For each collaborator engaged in the research, our IRB will contact their institution to initiate reliance procedures. This is basically an agreement between institutions that one IRB will rely on the review determination of the other IRB that will serve as the reviewing IRB for the project. This eliminates the need for researchers to obtain review and approval from both institutions for the same study. While our office does this on the collaborator's behalf, it is also important that the collaborator communicate with their own IRB to ensure they are compliant with their requirements. The second question on the application requests PIs to provide an estimate for when the study is expected to begin and when it is expected to end. It's important to note that no portion of the human subject research project can begin until IRB approval is obtained. This includes subject recruitment. The next section is where the PI will add their funding source. It's important to list all funding sources that will be utilized for your project to ensure appropriate regulations are being applied. For any external funding sources, a Mentis Blue Sheet number will be required for each award. If you are offering subjects any form of monetary compensation, there must be a funding source listed. The next section is about the risk classification for your project. To determine how your project should be classified, we refer directly to the definitions. Minimal risk means that the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research are not greater than those ordinarily encountered in daily life or during the performance of routine physical and psychological examinations or tests, and that confidentiality is adequately protected. Greater than minimal risk refers to research activities that do not meet the definition of minimal risk. Researchers will be asked to assess the risk level of their data collection procedures and indicate the risk level it falls under. The fifth question of the application is where you explain the primary research questions, hypotheses, and objectives that will guide the study. This section should clearly explain how the project meets the criteria of human subject research. The procedure section is very important and is one of the most common areas that IRB coordinators will return a protocol for. This section of the application should detail each data collection procedure in a step-by-step fashion from the very beginning of the research to the last communication. This section should include what data is being collected from subjects during each procedure, where the data will be collected, how the data will be collected, and when. It's important to note that this section should not appear as an overview or a summary. It must clearly detail each procedure. Also, the descriptions provided in this section should use clear and concise layman's language that can be easily understood by someone outside of your field. This may require additional definitions, explanations, or even pictures. This section should clearly display how many study visits will occur, what data is being collected from subjects in this research and how. If interviews or surveys will occur, the platform should be listed, and how subjects will be asked to access it should also be clear. If any portion of the study is being recorded, the type of recording should be clear, as well as what data is being captured. If there are optional elements to your research, or if the research is integrated into a course and is required for subjects to receive a grade, regardless of whether or not they choose to participate in the research, this should be fully detailed. Lastly, if your study will contain a lot of procedures, it's recommended to list the expected duration of each procedure in the description. Otherwise, in number 7 of the application, you should clarify how many visits and/or interactions with the subjects the study will contain, the amount of time required for each visit, and how long their total participation is expected to take over the entire duration of the study. It's important to ensure that the information provided in this section is consistent with details provided outside of your protocol application. For instance, if you provide an estimate here of a survey taking 5 minutes, but the consent form estimates a range between 5 and 10, the study will be returned. The estimated duration should be consistent across all documentation. The alternatives to participation section is intended to describe any available options that participants have if they choose not to participate in the research. An example of this would be if completion of your study will compensate subjects with extra credit. It is required for an alternative assignment to be offered to students in that course who are interested in obtaining extra credit, but who do not want to participate in the research. The alternative non-research option offered to students should be an assignment that requires equal effort, time, and awards the same amount of extra credit. The location and sites portion of the application should include all places where research procedures are expected to take place. If your study will take place in a lab, the building and/or room number should be provided. Specificity depends on the type of procedures being conducted in that lab. If your study will take place online, websites, platforms, apps, and software should be listed in this section. If any part of your study will take place at another institution or a location administratively separate from UTA, then a permission letter allowing the research to be conducted at this location should be included with your submission. In the personnel qualification section, all members of the research should be listed, as well as their role in the study and their relevant qualifications, training, or experience they may have to fulfill that role. The study oversight section is where the PI is expected to describe the communication plan with all listed personnel to ensure that all study procedures are being conducted ethically and in accordance with the approved protocol. If the PI is a student, this section should also include how the faculty advisor will oversee the student conducting the research. In the population section, the target population for the study should be described. For example, this could be subjects living within DFW, UTA students, and/or healthy young adults. In the inclusion and exclusion criteria, the eligibility criteria should be described. Inclusion criteria should describe the requirements for subjects to be eligible to participate in the study. The exclusion criteria should explain specific factors or criteria that would make the subject ineligible to participate. This section should describe how you intend to verify eligibility. For instance, will you be utilizing a pre-screening survey, listing the requirements in the recruitment materials, basing it off self-reporting, or are you utilizing a different method? The number of subjects you intend to enroll in your study should be a best estimate based on the type of study you intend to conduct. For minimal risk research projects, this is viewed as an estimate, and it's allowable to exceed this amount over the course of the study. If the research is greater than minimal risk, the estimated number should include the statistical justification and/or references for how this number was obtained. This number will also be viewed as a cap, and enrollment cannot exceed this number without an approved modification. The recruitment strategy should be described from first contact with a potential subject to the subject participating in the study procedures. This section should include all methods utilized to recruit subjects and how you will obtain their contact information if you are not planning to utilize publicly available information. For instance, if you have access to a listserv, or if you would like to recruit subjects from a course that you are teaching, a permission letter that allows use of these platforms for the purpose of research should be attached to your submission. If someone's going to share your recruitment materials on your behalf and private contact information is not being provided to the researchers, then a permission letter would not be required, but this should be clearly stated in the application. All recruitment materials should be listed in the application and attached for review in the submission. If you are recruiting by phone or in person, the script that will be used or the flyer that will be used to guide the discussion should be attached for review and approval. If you are planning to use subject pool posts like mTurk, Sona, or Prolific, the information posted about your research in those platforms should also be provided as part of your recruitment materials. The informed consent process is one of the most important parts of the research study. It's important that subjects are provided with sufficient information to understand the requirements of their participation and how their data will be collected and used. It's also important to note that you cannot obtain information about a person through another individual, such as from a family member or a friend, unless that person has also undergone the informed consent process themselves. In this section, describe all elements of the process: when it will happen, where it will happen, and how subjects will be providing their consent. If you're conducting a survey where subjects are just hitting I agree, this would require a waiver of the written consent documentation requirement. In 17A, we want justification for why you are requesting to waive this. If your study is federally funded or FDA regulated, you will also need to attach the form. If you are intending to waive portions or elements of the consent process, this will also require the form with your provided justification and how you intend to document consent. This is a copy of our minimal risk consent form template. As you can see, we have included a lot of prompts and red text that are intended to assist you with providing all required details for this document. You simply need to plug information from the application into the consent form. Please be sure that any details that you are providing in your consent form are consistent with the details you have provided in your application. One of the most common return comments for consent forms tends to be that the study title is different or the eligibility criteria is too brief. We've even seen different compensation types and amounts between the consent form and the application. So please double check that everything is consistent before you submit it for review. It should also be noted that when you submit the document to us for review, all of the prompt language should be removed. Our office needs to review the document exactly how it will be issued to the participating subjects. This includes the way you intend to document the subject's consent. If the consent form requires a handwritten signature, we will stamp the most recent version of the consent form with the approval date and the version number. If the consent form does not require a signature or if it will be embedded into a survey, we typically do not stamp the consent form. Incomplete disclosure occurs when an investigator withholds information about the specific purpose, nature, or other aspect of the research. Deception occurs when an investigator gives false information to subjects or intentionally misleads them about some key aspect of the research. If you plan to utilize this in your study, you will need to provide your reasoning and whether subjects will be debriefed at the end of the study. This should also include the language or the statement that will be issued to subjects at the end of their participation. Please describe all details about your compensation method. This should include how much subjects will receive and whether it will be prorated for partial participation. When the compensation will be issued to subjects and how. Will they be receiving it in person in cash? Will they receive a gift card through email? For all methods, describe how it will be documented and how confidentiality will be maintained. If you are planning to utilize a raffle, clarify how this will be conducted and how the winners will be notified. If the compensation amount for participating subject groups differs in any way, you have to describe why. And if a subject does not answer all questions in a survey or leaves early, will they still qualify to receive compensation? All of these details should be considered and described in both the application and the consent form. Compensation tends to be our #1 reason that our office receives complaints. The risk to subject section should clearly detail any actual or potential risks that subjects will encounter while participating in your study. This could be physical risks like falling or muscle soreness after exercise, or it could be psychological risks that may cause the subject to feel depressed, angry, or embarrassed while participating. There could also be social risks associated with participating in the study, especially if their identity will be known by others who are participating in the research. If you are conducting the study online or utilizing virtual platforms, there's always a potential risk to confidentiality. Also, if you are planning to recruit friends in your research, or if you are a teacher and you plan to recruit students that are enrolled in your current course, this could have influence on whether the potential subject decide to participate in your research or not. They may feel pressured or influenced based on the relationship dynamic. For each risk described, a strategy for minimizing it should be included in both the application and the consent form. Recently, we posted a new mental health resource that can be utilized by researchers, and this is now available on our website. If your study will involve blood draws, radiation, or x-rays, or utilize any devices that contain lasers, then additional approval from the Environmental Health and Safety Department will be required before the IRB can issue approval. For each procedure that applies to this section, the location, the exact materials, or the equipment used, how blood, body fluid, tissues will be handled and stored, etc. This last section should contain a list of direct benefits the study may have on subjects participating in the research, as well as the expected or potential benefits that this research study will have to the field of study or the society at large. Be sure to address all aspects of subject privacy and confidentiality. Privacy refers to a subject's right to control access to themselves. So in other words, how will you conduct your study procedures to ensure the subject can maintain as much privacy while participating as they feel comfortable? If you're conducting an interview, are you ensuring that it's in a private place or controlling the environment in a way to prevent any situation where they may be exposed as a research subject or embarrassed? Confidentiality, on the other hand, is the researcher's responsibility in protecting subject data and ensuring that it is not disclosed without their permission. In this section of the application, we want to know what type of data your study will contain. For instance, will it contain names and recordings that would be directly identifiable? Will you collect identifiable data but later replace it with a coding mechanism to further protect against data breaches or exposing someone as a research subject? Will the subject be utilizing a pseudonym while participating that de-identifies that data from the research team, but is still linked to that participating subject across all procedures? Or will you be conducting a survey that collects no identifiers at all, and there's no way to know who is participating in your study? This section of the application should describe exactly how and where all paper and electronic data will be stored for the entire data retention period. It should be noted that data can only be maintained on UTA-sanctioned encrypted devices or software, unless additional exceptions are granted. We will be discussing these exceptions and considerations for data security a little more at the end of the presentation. If the PI is a student, or if it's known that the PI will be leaving UTA before the end of the data retention period, a long-term storage arrangement should be described in this section. If any part of your study could result in identifying child abuse, elderly abuse, communicable diseases, or criminal activities that would or could not have otherwise been identified, how do you plan to maintain confidentiality, and what is your plan of action if any of these are revealed? The data sharing section should provide details about any identifiable data collected in the study that will be shared outside of the research. If the study has data sharing, details should include where, when, and to whom the data will be shared. The last question on the application asks researchers to describe any actual or potential conflicts of interest. In other words, whether the PI or any of the protocol personnel have an affiliation, arrangement, or financial interest in the research that could be perceived as a conflict of interest. The end of the application serves as a reminder of some of the documents that may be required and should be submitted with your application in Mentis. This includes any surveys, questionnaires, interview questions, instructional materials, recruitment materials, permission letters, or documents for non-UTA collaborators. The IRB must review and approve any documents that will be issued to subjects as part of the research. It should be noted that if you are conducting a survey, a link in the application directing us to it can be helpful in some instances, but it is a requirement that screenshots or a PDF version of the survey be attached to the protocol submission in Mentis. This is our device form. If your study will utilize any medical devices, each device should be listed in this table, as well as the FDA status of the device and whether your study intends to test the safety or effectiveness of the device. All manuals and other relevant safety information for each device should be included in the submission for IRB review. Additional details about these requirements, along with definitions and further guidance on making these determinations, are included within the document and can be found on our Forms and Templates page. Once your application and consent form have been completed, you're ready to start the submission process in Mentis. The next few slides will walk you through the submission process. Once your submission is ready for IRB review, you will need to upload all of your documents into Mentis. This is an example of what a human subject research protocol looks like within Mentis. You will be assigned a protocol number and be required to list all UTA protocol personnel that will be engaged in the project. By clicking on the green Show Details button next to each researcher, you will also be able to view their training completion dates. And this is a helpful way to ensure that you stay on top of reminders. The box on the top right is filled in by the IRB staff following preliminary review. Mentis will require you to provide a protocol title and a brief summary of your project. Please ensure that the protocol title you intend to use in Mentis is consistent with the title you plan to use across all documentation. Lastly, you will be required to upload your protocol application, consent document, and any other data collection instruments or supplemental documents. This is the bottom of the submission. Here you will note that we have included a comment box. This can be used by the PI or researchers to add additional information that may be pertinent to the review. It is also the section of the submission where you will receive return comments from the IRB staff informing you of any missing details or documents or requesting edits or corrections. Our office does not get prompted when a comment is uploaded in the submission. We will not review this information until it is undergoing preliminary review. So if there's any time-sensitive information that we need to know about your study, please reach out to our office directly. Once the IRB has received a submission, many researchers wonder what the review process looks like. In the next few slides, I will describe the review process from the moment it is received in our inbox to when approval is issued in Mentis. This is our review flowchart that describes the pathways for the different types of human subject research that we review. Most of the studies we receive are minimal risk. And minimal risk means that the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research are not greater in and of themselves than those ordinarily encountered in the subject's daily life or during the performance of a routine physical or psychological examination or test. Greater than minimal risk would refer to research activities that do not meet the definition of minimal risk. The third option shown is reliance, and this is an agreement between institutions when UTA personnel are engaged in research outside of UTA. By knowing what category your study falls under, the flowchart, which is available on our website as well, will give you an idea of the pathway that your study will likely follow while being reviewed. Most studies are minimal risk and do not need to be reviewed by an IRB member or reviewed at a convened IRB meeting. If the study is greater than minimal risk, it will likely require review at a convened IRB meeting. If the study has federal funding or FDA-regulated devices or drugs, then it is likely that a single member of the IRB will need to conduct a final review of the project in order for you to receive approval. The IRB staff will inform you if your study requires review at a convened IRB meeting. When conducting a review, the IRB will consider whether the potential or actual risks are being minimized to the fullest extent possible. They're also ensuring that the potential or expected benefits justify exposing subjects to the risks outlined in the study. The IRB will review all data collection procedures to ensure that each step of the procedure is clearly detailed. The IRB will consider the type and amount of compensation being issued to subjects and will ensure that it is reasonable and fair. The IRB will also consider the type of data that will be collected in the study and whether the outlined security measures are sufficient in protecting subject privacy as well as subject confidentiality. Following a preliminary review of the submission, the IRB specialist will likely return the protocol back to you to request any necessary revisions or clarifications. Once it is sent back to you, Mentis will send a notification email. You can view the request for revisions or clarifications in the comment section of your protocol submission in Mentis. Once you have completed all necessary revisions, you will need to resubmit the protocol for a final review. If your protocol is minimal risk, or if the study has federal funding and qualifies for review under one of the exempt categories, then the IRB coordinators will be able to issue approval. If your protocol will be reviewed under one of the expedited review categories, once the IRB coordinators have deemed that the study is ready for approval, they will send the protocol to a single member of the IRB who will either review and approve the protocol or return it back with conditions for approval. If your protocol is greater than minimal risk or requires review at an IRB meeting, the IRB coordinator will inform you of the meeting date your protocol will be reviewed at. The IRB meets every second Tuesday of the month. Once you've been issued IRB approval, it should be noted that additional steps may be needed or should be considered. For instance, if you need to make any changes to the documents approved in your original protocol, a modification will need to be submitted for IRB review and approval before the change can be implemented. This would include any changes to the study procedures, questions on a survey, changes to recruitment strategies or materials, or any changes to compensation methods or amounts. A modification will also be required if you need to change the study PI, faculty advisor, or a specially qualified personnel member. These personnel members have a specialized role in the study and the qualifications and/or training necessary to perform that role. For instance, the personnel member on your study that will conduct blood draws or that will be responsible for communicating with non-English language speakers. If you need to change, add, or remove any of these types of personnel, a modification will be required before the change can be implemented. Lastly, your study may require an annual continuing review. If your study requires this, you will see a protocol expiration date on your study in Mentis, and your approval letter will inform you of this requirement. Our office also reaches out with a reminder to researchers that have studies with this requirement, and if required, the IRB will need to review the amount of subjects that have been enrolled in the study so far, how many have withdrawn and why, and whether any unanticipated problems or non-serious adverse events have occurred. If you experience any unanticipated problems or serious adverse events while conducting your study, this should be reported to the Office of Regulatory Services by email immediately. Once you have fully completed your enrollment, subject follow-up, data collection, and any data analysis of identifiable data, then you will need to request to have your protocol closed in Mentis. It's very important that you do this, as the data retention period does not begin until you have an IRB closure date. You can request to have your study closed by submitting a modification or by emailing our office. It should be noted that any identifiable data collected in your study should be maintained for the full data retention period. If you have no intention of utilizing the identifiable data for analysis, and you are only planning to store it for data retention requirements, then you are still able to close your study. Again, all data collected in your study must be maintained for a minimum of 3 years from the IRB closure date of your protocol in Mentis. It is important to note that if you are a student who will be graduating soon, or if you plan to leave UTA before this period is up, someone at UTA must be responsible for maintaining the documentation for the rest of the retention period. If you are a student, this is typically your faculty advisor.